Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's Adam Contos here. Myself and Madeleine Zook, known as Maddie, wanted to get together and have a conversation with everybody about growing same-store sales in a slowing economy, because we all know that we have been in a difficult economy for franchisees and franchisors for the past few years. And this is a very common topic that we all have with the franchisees, whether or not you are staff in a franchise, or you're a franchise business consultant or franchise development consultant. Maybe you're in franchise development or franchise sales, or just a franchisee for that matter. You're feeling it firsthand. Everybody is dealing with the same thing. It takes us back to the days of COVID when we all had to shut down in some manner globally. So I was dealing with about 9,000 franchisees worldwide, and everybody got shut down at that point. It was really a crazy time. But what we do in franchising is we adapt. This is an entrepreneurial sport, and I think that there are a lot of great opportunities for us. But let's dig into, first of all, who we are, and then why we're here to talk about this with you. So, like I said, I'll introduce myself. My name is Adam Contos. I'm the former CEO of Remax. I'm currently the interim CEO of Porta Subs, as well as a partner at Area 15 Ventures. I've been in franchising and consulting and franchising for 2 decades, and I love this type of business. So I also teach at the University of Denver. I teach executive leadership there to executive MBA students. Maddie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Madeleine Zook, or Maddie for short. Reader's Digest, I'm a franchisee, franchisor, and supplier. I have a couple supplier companies in the recruiting, education, and marketing space. My husband and I are franchisees of 4 different brands in the home service area. We have upwards of about 50 units in the Philly area. And I'm also the CMO of a couple franchisors. Right now I do it fractionally or interim. And so I get a lot of these questions coming up. So, I'm a huge Adam fan, and I said, hey, I know what I know, but I think that you're going to be able to teach it better. So that's why we're here.
Awesome. Okay, well, let's dive into this. Let me move my screen out of the way here. So essentially what we know about the current state of franchising is brands are underperforming. They're really not reaching their full potential in 2024. I don't know anybody who would disagree with that. If you are killing it in your brand, I love you for that. That's fantastic. But the reality is, in this day and age, I think we can all, tweak things a little bit, pull some levers, make a couple of different adjustments, and do even better. That's what we're here to help you with. So we want to grow, essentially, but we face some headwinds in doing that. Obviously, you look at economic and inflationary impact. The cost of goods has been going up the past few years. There's no doubt about that. If nothing else, the cost of fuel has gone up, and transporting these goods, cost of wages for people packing and creating these goods, or the supplies that you may use, it all has created a economic impact on franchisees. So if you look at the macro impact here, there's really not much we can do about the macro impact, but there are things that we can do about the micro impact within our franchise network. So when you look at food, cost of food has gone up. We know the cost of groceries has gone up. Everybody's aware of that. And it's not just us, it's the customer as well. So their spending has decreased as prices have increased. If you're in service, you have wages, you have fuel to put in your vehicles, you have the cost of supplies that you're distributing. The reality is that the majority of franchisors and franchisees, when we're surveyed in 2023, said we expect prices to continue to rise in 2024. That's true. We have seen that. Inflation's at about 3.6% right now. It's starting to level off. It's not as high as it was before, but the reality is we need that to come down. Hopefully, I say hopefully, interest rates will start pushing down a little bit, or at least temper a little bit come later on in 2024. We expect that to start happening. We'd like to see house interest rates in the 5 point something range. So a 5 handle in front of that will make a big difference, because as Maddie knows, being in the home services space, there are so much opportunity and so many purchases occur within, 14 to 18 months of the home purchase and home sale. So think about that. This really is an important thing for us to think about, the economy. Let's talk about revenue and profitability decline though. Revenue and profitability have decreased because obviously prices have gone up, inflation, the consumer has made different purchasing decisions. They're trying to make do with less. They're getting haircuts less often. They're going out to eat less often. They're, instead of buying a whole bunch of food someplace, they might buy it in order to create leftovers out of it or something of that nature. COGS definitely increased, a problem that we have to attack. And ultimately, when we look at waste and things like that, we'll talk about, consolidating and managing your expenses later on. That has a lot to do with it. So that's kind of an added variable we need to deal with. Employee talent, recruiting and retaining talent has not gotten any easier. This is interesting though, because some people are really good at it, and I'll explain to you why in a little bit, but ultimately a lot of people are struggling with this. I think we've actually gotten a little bit worse when it comes to this. So there are surveys that are out recently, and they say ultimately that 51% of employees are looking for jobs right now. 51%.
And I can confirm that, knowing that I own a franchise executive recruiting firm, and there's quite a bit quietly looking.
The quiet quitting has not stopped. So I saw a headline the other day, we can't quit quiet quitting is what it said. So quiet quitting continues. Here's the interesting flip side of that coin though. 42% of those people that want to leave a position or are looking can be saved. Now, maybe you don't want to save those 42%, but maybe you do want to save those 42%. It depends on who in your organization is engaged. You want to make sure that those that are engaged do not leave. Those that are highly disengaged, the opposite end of the spectrum, they're miserable and they're telling everybody, you kind of want to help them because they may be driving out some of that 51% that wants to leave right now. Now, marketing, Maddie, why don't you talk to this as a CMO? Tell us what you think about marketing and some of the things we need to look at with that.
Yeah, I would say the quickest way to cover marketing is it's truly confusion and overwhelm. And the way I see it, especially at the franchisee level, is everyone wants spend this and through this channel and I'm going to get X. Now it seems simple enough, but it's just simply not how it works anymore. I'd say maybe that was like 20 years ago. In one of our brands, Made Pro, we could send out a direct mailer and know we were going to get X amount of clients. I'd say fast forward 10 years and it was more like a fork, right? We had our cost per lead or cost per acquisition. Maybe there were 3 or 4 outlets. Now, present day, it's very much like a wheel, and every cog in that wheel has to be moving, or it slows it down, it increases the price. So it's tough to communicate that not only to franchisees, but to the internal team as well. Because unless you're deep inside the marketing metrics, everything's changing all of the time. So it's really hard to understand, where do I trust? Where do I put my money? And why can't I just figure out how much a new client's going to cost me?
Exactly. And speaking of those questions, a lot of times when we start asking those questions and get that confusion and overwhelm going, we lack on leadership. So the last pillar that we have here in people not reaching their full potential, we're going to dig into all these obviously, is lack of leadership development. When we get busy, we stop growing. And that's a dangerous paradigm for us to be involved in. Substantially dangerous for our employees, because what they see us do, they will do. We operate our leadership principles based upon mirror neurons. When we see somebody doing something, we mimic that. If you're having an employee meeting and you're pounding on the table and cussing at the customer and things like that, well, guess what? Your employees are going to pound on the table and cuss at the customer because it becomes okay culturally within your organization. If you're training and becoming a better leader, guess what? Your employees will be interested in becoming a better leader. This is a great way to build bench strength. So we have to consider all of these things, but ultimately it comes down to there's a massive reduction in leadership training that's been going on in businesses since COVID hit. Why? I have no idea. But we have a generation out there entering the workforce. So Gen Z is entering the workforce. They really haven't received any leadership training. And the millennials have received very little at that point. And, you look at, okay, we used to talk about millennials entering the workforce. Well, we have a vice president candidate who's a millennial. So millennials are in key leadership roles in the workforce at this point. So keep that on the top of your mind, because we have to be developing our leaders. But before we start, let's understand a couple of external economic factors you face. First of all, it's an election year. And, franchise brands have reported on average a 10% decline in sales. Some huge challenges here. And then also there are economic trends that indirectly impact your product or service, such as real estate. That's a great example. The housing market is not at a very high point. In fact, it's at kind of skipping along the bottom. We expect it to recover relatively well in 2024 into 2025, but it's nowhere near where it has been. So those that service homes, the home servicing brands, have seen some adaptation that they've had to make in the space. So these variables are interesting, both from like even a marketing perspective, all the way to an operational perspective and a hiring perspective. Speaking of marketing, let's pass it off to Maddie here to dig into the marketing.
Yeah. So, and on that slide too, and when we send out the recording and our cheat sheet slides, I'm also going to include some links that I find really helpful. For instance, one, and this is where I get all this data from, but also there's one called like the Lira report, which is the leading renovation report, which tells us like, how are trends in home services doing? What can we anticipate and what's coming? So that's really good to equip yourselves and your teams with. And we're going to talk more about that moving forward. But I think the biggest thing that a lot of you want to hear on this is give me the numbers, give me the hard facts, because I want to go back and tell my brand, my leader, my franchisees, it's not me, it's the economy. And so while this is based across all industries, it's about 17,000 campaigns over the last 2003 to 2004. This is what you can anticipate. Click-through rate has increased, which is great, but your cost per click has increased. Your conversion rate has decreased, and your cost per lead has increased as well. So basically all that to say is that leads are more expensive. The other day I was on a call with a brand, and one of the franchisees said, my cost per lead is like 40 to 60 bucks. It's outrageous. And I was like, outrageously good? Like, it's expectation setting where if they think that they're going to get free leads, organic leads, $25 leads, that's just setting ourselves up to fail. And the only way that you can circumvent that is leading with data and having the franchisee truly understand what they can anticipate to sell. Them sell, but anticipate to get. And I would say, it's hard because when you go from the franchise development process, where I don't want to say you rose-colored glasses, but it's a sales process, let's be honest. And you want to give them the best of the best. And when it gets to operations and it gets to marketing, we like to set them up for like lower expectations. So oftentimes it becomes this like juxtaposition of like, wait, where am I landing? So you can just comfortably see, and if you want to go to the next slide, Adam, we have to be clear that like, look at from 2019 to 2024, like the monopoly is crazy. And this is a big reason why costs are going up, is because Google understands they have the monopoly. There was a Senate hearing about it. It's pretty enticing if you listen to it. And basically what I'm telling franchisees is you have to pay to play. And as more money flows through Google, they're going to continue adapting to get more money. So now you're not just paying for a top placement, you're paying for the links, the sponsored tag, the lines of text, and you're competing with everybody out there on your keywords. And the matter of fact is that like, it's just going to continue getting more expensive, which is why it's great to have our teams that are trained properly and to set expectations moving forward. Go ahead, Adam. And so this, I will also send this out so you can take a better look at it, because your service and your franchise brand will fall into one of these benchmarks. But basically what it's telling us is that your franchisee marketing strategy needs to increase your investment in digital. And if not, then those costs have to be offset with local efforts. So I understand that running a business, you need to do local and digital. Is it 50-50? Never. But what I'm having to explain to franchisees more than I think I expected is that If you don't want to pay X in digital based on what the data says, our benchmarks, and we have like marketing revenue calculators, which I'm happy to share out too. Then you have to offset those costs by doing localized marketing. And obviously there's ways to track that, but door hangers, events, you name it. There is no in between. You can't rely or expect organic leads or free leads, or I joined a franchise. And especially in a year like this year, they need to be overspending in order to probably hit what they were hitting in 2022 and 2023. And they're not ready to do that. And they will be ready to do that if you give them data and give them the hard guardrails of there is no in between here where I can get you a lower cost per lead, more clients for less work and less money. That's just the simple fact of it all. And they might be inadvertently asking that, which is why it's very good to have the data and the training behind it to say, I understand you want that. That's what everyone wants. Oftentimes I talk to brands for dev and I'm like, wait, let me get this straight. You don't want to pay a lot of money. You want what everyone else wants, and you want to make sure the franchisee is going to open multiple territories. Like if you think about it, it doesn't make sense. So a quick tip I give is usually give them the triangle method, which is you can get two of the three, right? You've got speed, you've got quality, and you've got cost efficiency. Pick two because you can't have all three. So oftentimes that helps kind of frame these conversations in marketing. But all that to say, costs are going up and our benchmarks are going to have to follow with that as well.
Awesome.
So yeah, so I'm going to hand it back off to Adam because he's better equipped to talk to these things than me. But basically what I want to say is, like, when you get on a call with a franchisee or your team and you're saying, dang, numbers are down over here, what can we do? I'm not hitting my metrics, or I'm nervous, why I joined a franchise, what's going on? The first thing they want to know, is it just me? And what we talked about before can help equip you for understanding, like, is it truly them? Are they firing on all cylinders? Are we addressing what needs to be addressed? Or are there economic factors at play? Oftentimes when I send people the Lira report and I'm like, this goes back to 2007 and have been pretty spot on, oftentimes their guard comes down. They go, okay, it's not me. It's not my brand. It's not my business coach. There's a lot of, the uncontrollables. And then they want to know what the plan is. I cannot stand when a franchise business coach or marketing coach gets on the phone with me and I'm like, hey, PPC, the costs have doubled. What can we do? What's going on? And they say, oh, we'll just add more money or go add more yard signs. Like, that's not a plan. You need a plan of action that they feel that they can be safe, comfortable, and understand that, yes, there are risks involved and it might not work out, but it can't just always be put on the franchisee of, well, our brand is great, you just need to do more. And I see that 90% of the time, and it just aggravates the situation.
Awesome. So what does this lead to? This leads to this emotional conversation that so many have had with their franchisees, or maybe with their franchisor if you're the franchisee. So why do we have these things? Why do we have these emotional outbursts when we're trying to do business together? Well, we start to think when we're under pressure, where am I getting this pressure from? It's coming from the business. And a lot of times we hear the question of, what have you done for me lately? Typically asked of the franchisor, if what the franchisee is doing isn't working or something of that nature. Or maybe you're the franchisee and you feel this way. So we both need to live and understand this frustration, because it's a common ground that we both share. So how do we get out of this? First of all, we have to understand, is this happening because one of us or both of us are in survival mode? A great way to think about what is survival mode, how do I recognize if somebody's in that, what's the reason for these outbursts, is to take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I use this diagram constantly when I'm doing leadership instruction. This is probably the best way to understand where your franchisees are, where your franchisor is, where the employee is, where just a customer is, or somebody that you're dealing with. Because when we are in a bad situation, we drop down to the bottom of this. Physiologically, if we have water, food, shelter, bare necessities, things of that nature for survival, yes, we're in a good place if we have those things. If we're struggling to make ends meet, and are wondering, okay, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I can't make my rent. I can't put food on the table or diapers on my baby, whatever it might be. You're fighting from the very bottom. You can't go from the bottom in a very defensive place all the way to the top, which is where we want people to get to, the self-actualization there. So briefly, taking a look at this, if somebody's struggling to make ends meet, typically they're in the physiological aspect. If they are upset because they feel pressure, generally it's the climate or, obviously safety or something of that nature, they're also going to be defensive. When we're down below in these safety and physiological aspects, we go into this survival mode, which is essentially fight, flight, or freeze. More than anything, it's freeze. If you see a franchisee, a employee or something like that doing nothing, a lot of times it's because they live in a state of overwhelm. Now, I will say this, friend dev people, what's the number one reason why people don't execute on the agreement besides funding? Because they should be past funding by the time they get to the agreement. It's overwhelm. We've overwhelmed them with everything that we're talking about here. We've overwhelmed them with this huge FDD. We told them you might need an attorney. We might as well read them their Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent, all these other things, because it scares them that much when we're telling them, go get an attorney to review this, but we need to. So we have to figure out a way to, really provide a safe environment for them to think about this in that's not scaring them away, that's pushing them down into those safety and the physiological needs there. We want to get people to the top of this. So self-actualization, I want everybody to picture when your shift or your team at some point had a huge success and everybody got together and celebrated this success. And everybody felt so good in their heart and they were smiling and the business was doing really good at that moment. That's what self-actualization feels like. We don't have to win a game or hit our record to have self-actualization, but we do need to the things that we can't give ourselves, which is personal attention and appreciation. We need the things that help us feel self-actualization in the business. So I'm not saying to candy coat things. I'm not saying to BS your way through anything when your franchisee is struggling to make ends meet. But the reality is understand where they're at and where you want to try and get them to. You're going to get them someplace good when the customers are treated well, when the employees are treated well, they're going to start performing better. But we as a franchisor, if you're the franchisor, have to perform well. And franchise leader, manager, owner, whatever you are, you have to perform well also. So it's a combination of the franchisor and that franchise operator doing their very best. So these emotional things drive essentially what the goals are of a franchisor. So what are the goals of a franchisor? It's not complicated. We way overcomplicate it. We might put a big mission, vision, value statement on it and all these other fancy things that we like to say, but ultimately it comes down to two things. And you don't have the second one without the first. So the number one priority that you should be thinking about every day when you go into the franchisor or franchisee is lead the growth of same-store sales. We are here for one reason, and that is to grow same-store sales. If we grow same-store sales, everything is fantastic because people are making more money. There's more opportunity for profitability and people want to buy franchises. So our number one goal in franchising, grow same-store sales. Let's not cloud it with anything else. If that's not what we're hyper-focused on every single day, we're missing what our goal is as a franchisor. And franchisee, it's not the franchisor's job. The franchisor facilitates the system. You do the growing. So we all need to work together in order to accomplish these things. And the second priority, grow the brand. Expand the brand. Why? Because that helps with brand recognition. The customers know, like, and trust you even more when they see the growth of a brand. Obviously, I mentioned, people see that the brand is expanding, so they want to get on a moving train and buy a franchise themselves or buy a territory, something of that nature. But ultimately, it comes down to how do we accomplish these things? We accomplish these things through really good coaching and accountability in our business.
And I would say a lot of what's the issues we're seeing in franchising now is, I'm sure a lot of you see, oh, how did this brand sign so many and this brand signed so many? And at the end of the day, we can sell franchises, but did they open? Did they close in their first year? I was once with a brand that They sold at one point, they had sold 20 so far in the year and closed 40. You know, it's about the long-term game. And if you get too caught up in, I'm going to sell more territories, I'm going to keep going, especially at the high level, the rest of the people will take care of it. They know what they bought into. That's not playing the long game, and your validations and your royalties are going to suffer. And we're going to talk about that moving forward as well.
Awesome. Great point, Maddie. How do we accomplish these things? Obviously, leadership. Leadership gets us there. So,
for those of you who don't know, Adam was a Marine and was a SWAT leader. Like, he literally has led in life or death. And for me, I played basketball, but leadership for me has always been just like a corporate keyword. So you'll hear Adam talking a lot about leadership, and he has courses on it. But I think the reason why I wanted to do this with Adam is because it really hits home for what's lacking, I think, right now in franchising, is how does that become just not a key word and something you actually mold to build a successful franchise? And that's how they've all done it. McDonald's, Burger King, you name it. They're the leaders in the space. How do you get your brand to lead in your industry?
and by the way, it's not just us franchise people in franchising where we're lacking leadership. It's across business, but Madeleine is absolutely correct. This is the foundation for what we need to do. So let's talk about real quick, a business school review. And if you haven't been to business school, let me sum it up for you in 3 small blocks here. How do you grow a business? Well, the first way, get more customers. Increasing the customers and reducing the customer churn. What's customer churn? It's losing a customer and getting a new one to replace them. We want more customers coming in than are going out of our network that are customers of ours. So we need to get more customers. So think about that. How do I get more customers today than I had yesterday? And how do I keep the ones that I currently have? The second way, sell more dollars per customer. So basically, you can raise the prices, which really isn't the greatest thing to do. I think we've all raised the prices to the point that we should at this point, or that we can. Maybe you're not quite there yet and you need to inch them up a tiny bit more, but beware, raising prices also is a double-edged sword. But a nominal raise in prices, if people are feeling the value of the product or service that they're receiving, they're generally fine with that. But it is competing against other things in their lives right now. So you can raise prices, or you can increase the items sold per purchase. So, maybe you're standing at the end of a sandwich line, like in one of my businesses, and you offer them some chips or a cookie or a brownie or something like that. Sell more to that customer at that point. Maybe you're painting houses and you have some sort of an upsell where you can do their garage floor, or add in a couple of other different services that you might offer, power washing, or who knows what else. What else can we sell that person right there? So more dollars per customer in that transaction. And then the third one, increase customer frequency. So how do we get that customer to return for more? Or how do we get them into a membership type organization that is recurring revenue for us, or something of that nature? But we want to sell more frequently to that customer than what we have been doing in the past. So this is simply it. This is how you grow a business, by bringing in more revenue. Increase the number of customers, increase the number of things that you're selling the customer, or increase the number of times that you're doing that. Simply put, we overcomplicate this. We get confused, we get overwhelmed. Again, fear, doubt, and overwhelm stops transactions, stops business movement. So ultimately, we want to think about, how do we accomplish these 3 things?
And I'll say on that too, Adam, if you want to go back just one, otherwise I'll forget my train of thought. For our Made Pros, we've got about 20 locations and do 5 or so million. So a decent size franchise. We talk about attrition more than we talk about new customers. And the attrition is that churn, because that is something that is extremely controllable, because when it comes down to it, what is it? Is it price? Is it we didn't do well enough? What can we do to solve? So that's something that your franchisees can implement right away when it comes to churn. In terms of selling more per customer, mine are home services. So it's really hard to be like, hey, I'll also kill your ticks when I kill your mosquitoes. However, there are other things that you can sell that aren't necessarily out of your model that may help. For instance, like hey, we noticed that, your gutters are full. We're just going to go ahead and scrape them out because oftentimes that's where mosquitoes breed. Little things like that. It's going to be $20 and etc. And it also increases customer experience. So don't be afraid too of saying, well, I can't upsell. I don't own a port of subs. I don't have cookies to sell. I think everyone has a cookie to sell if you look hard enough. And then in terms of increasing customer sales frequency, you really, really, really need to talk to your franchisees on this. I talked to a couple brands lately that are in my local area, and they're like, look, I could sell this, but my franchisor keeps saying no, and I'm watching money walk out the door. Now, I understand that you can't make amends for every single thing that comes through, but are you working off a model that was great in 2022 and you're not, now molding your processes and your offerings to the newest economy? Maybe they don't want to buy a 10-pack anymore. Maybe it's a 5-pack, and that's okay, because maybe they buy a 5-pack and they buy it twice or 3 times instead of just buying a 10-pack once. So I really encourage you to listen to your franchisees, because they're day in and day out seeing what their customers want. And if we're going to continue hand-holding or handcuffing them, it's going to be harder overall.
Great points. So how we make more money really only matters if we also manage our expenses. And I think everybody would agree with that. A lot of times this is a binary thing where we're focused on one or the other. We always are talking about, hey, how do we start our expenses or, increase our revenue? But we forget about how do we manage our expenses a lot. And this is where we have found money in different businesses. When we sit down and take a look at a business, this is how we end up making more money, is by managing the expenses. So at the bottom line, it's not how much you have come in, it's how much you keep. And this helps us keep more. So ultimately, how do you manage your expenses as simply as increasing the revenue? This should be part of that conversation, not just how are we getting more customers, but okay, how are we spending less while we're getting more customers? It's a good question. A lot of times we don't look at that. A lot of times it comes down to an embarrassing situation. The franchisee, maybe they're paying for their car or, their kids' daycare or who knows what out of the coffers of the store. Well, they're embarrassed about that. We need to actually take a look at those things and say, look, I get it. You're trying to, pre-tax some of these things, but this works. This doesn't work. The reality is we need to just be very mindful of how we manage our expenses. So how can we take a look at this? Well, there are 3 largest expense categories generally. And I say generally because we're talking about a vast type of franchise system out there, is obviously lease of the location or the equipment. So maybe you have a truck, or maybe you have a brick and mortar location, or maybe you have equipment, whatever that might be. That's a lot of times an expense that is difficult to push back against. Now, I will say this, maybe you don't have to buy the truck as often, maybe an oil change increase or something like that, or servicing it a little bit better, or maybe looking at it a little bit closer will help you manage the longevity of that particular item. Perhaps cleaning a location more will save you having to repair it or paint it or something like that. Obviously, upkeep does impact some of those things that you generally have the least amount of control over, but it's something you definitely need to look at. What do we have moderate control over? The cost of goods and our supplies. So ultimately, we can only get our cost of goods and our supplies so low. We need to work with the franchisor, if you're a franchisee, in order to maximize your purchasing power when it comes to those things. That's one of the key aspects of being a franchisor. You should be giving group purchasing power to your franchisees. Now, there's some things they have to run out and buy at a moment's notice. They might have to go to Home Depot or the grocery store, or who knows, in order to fulfill something. It's hard to get a discount on those things, but if they're registered at those locations as a reseller, maybe you can get a discount that way. A lot of those locations do offer contractor rates or something like that. The most controllable is personnel. This is where I see a ton of overspending. Let's say you have a shift, and on that shift, you have 6 people and you have 3 in training. So you have 9 people on the shift at that time. A lot of people always have people in training. So essentially you're running at 150% of your personnel cost at that moment. 150% of your personnel cost. That is way too high. Just think if all you did was run at that rate, because all you do is have people in training, or you're paying overtime constantly or something of that nature. This is one of the key aspects that we can manage the most and the best. Now, why do we have turnover in our stores? Well, a number of reasons, but really one of the biggest is people get burned out by their boss. So everybody take and go like this, and you might be the problem. I always like to have a conversation and say, we have to hold up the mirror and say, look, does somebody need to be fired in this organization? And people are like, everybody, I think, knows somebody who needs to be fired. We probably all do. Now, my second question would be, is that person sitting next to you? Obviously, we're all on Zoom right now, so maybe not. But the third question is that person you? So we need to understand when we need to move on with leadership, when we need to make adjustments so we're not driving good employees away. Employee turnover is one of the biggest expense issues, especially when you're dealing with minimum wage or low salaries. I want to make a point here, though, talking about fees and talking about expenses, because franchise fees are also an expense. Franchisors, I've seen it, Madeleine has seen it, you cannot fee your way to success. You cannot say, we need to make some more money. Oh, the founder or the shareholders or whoever it is says, we need to make 2% more this year. Okay, let's just raise the expenses of the franchisees. That's not how it works. It's about opening more franchises, creating more royalties, because collectively the system generates more revenue. It's not about feeing your way to success. You're never going to survive that way. In fact, all you're going to do is drive people away from you. So think about that.
Yeah, and I would say too, I see this often. I have to remind founders a lot, like, you can't build based on what you're bringing in fees. You owe it to that franchisee to provide the infrastructure. And a lot of times when they see these big checks coming, the royalties, they forget that they might still need to be in investment mode. There's different stages of a business. And I would say that you're never truly out of investment mode, right? I'm 20 years into our Made Pro and we're still reinvesting. Sometimes I ask why. That's for another question, another time. But, I think that it's a reminder of the long game. And you have to ask yourself, like, if I'm increasing the fees, how much longer am I going to take to hit the AUV I want to see in the royalties in 5 years, in 3 years, in 10 years? Because now I'm taking away from their profitability. What does that mean for me? Because a lot of times it's about me. It's about the bottom line. It's about the founders. So you can't just sit here and say, we got to take these fees out, or we got to take the buffer out of the fee. You have to frame it in a way of, I understand why you're doing this. However, these are the data metrics of what it's going to pull from our franchisees. And here's how that could potentially affect our revenue, because if it's going here, it's not going here, we'll say marketing. And we know based on our benchmarks that this much marketing can equate to this much in revenue. So now what? So now is that fee that you want to bump from 600 to 750 worth the potential 20,000 you could make in revenue based on the commercial bids that you're getting? You have to frame it in ways that isn't just a fee is going to put more money in my pocket right away up front. It's also going to take from you down the road.
Great points. So how do we work on all this? Well, one of the first ways we can work on this is with, again, I've said it before, leadership. The question I have is, what 5 things do you give to your franchisees when it comes to your leadership? Can you write down 5 things of how you lead your franchisees? Or do you just walk in and do an inspection on their location, or call them up and go, hey, how's it going? Because that's not leadership. That's managing the system. And we have to manage the system, but we have to lead the people to perform better and help them understand where they can be even better. So I like the analogy of the difference between exercising and training. And my wife told me this because this is about me, transparently. We're at the gym and I was walking around and I was doing reps on my iPhone. And my wife looks at me, she goes, what are you doing here? And I sat down on the leg machine and I was doing some leg extensions. And she goes, "You're just moving around." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, there's a difference between exercising and training. Training means you have a system and you have accountability and you hold yourself accountable, but you can also get somebody else to hold you accountable, which is why people hire a trainer. The trainer's job is to keep you on your system and hold you accountable for doing more and doing better." So our job is to help our franchisees train, not just exercise. If they go in every day and they just turn the key in the door and unlock it and go in, turn on the lights and go through the motions and then turn the key and go home at the end of the day, they just exercised. But how do they train? How do they function with maximizing their marketing? How do they function with getting their employees in a headspace where the customers love coming there because they love interacting with the employees? One of the reasons why customers return is because of how they were treated by other human beings. That's a key aspect to growing a business. It's also a key aspect to leadership. So what 5 things can you do to improve your business? What 5 things can your franchisees do to improve their business? So here's an interesting stat for you. I want you to think about this.
Adam, will you give some examples of like 5 things you're talking about?
Sure. So clarity is a good example. If you're lacking clarity, a great example of clarity is, what do I want you to do today? Instead of just showing up and hanging out at the counter waiting for something to happen. When you're not helping a customer, I'd love it if you walked up to the other customers and ask them how their day is going and greet them with a smile. So be clear about what your employees need to do. Another one is competence. Do you know their job and do you know your job? If you don't know their job and you don't know your job, learn it. Do you have a really good employee who's a rock star? Hey, show me why you're a rock star. I really appreciate it. Help me improve my competence. Things of that nature. Another one is your attitude. So do you walk around with a smile on your face, or do you walk around with just a scowl, or the resting face that we all see people sit on Zoom with on occasion? There's somebody out there going, do you look at your employees that way? Because energy is transferable. And I don't mean to get woo-woo on you with this whole thing, but the reality is when we give smiles away, we get them back. And that's what we're looking for amongst our employees and amongst our companies. So I teach a class called Executive Presence. And executive presence, one of the key aspects to that is your appearance. Are you the owner of that franchise? Do you look like you care about being the owner of that franchise? Because if you show up with your wrinkled shirt, like you just slept in it and didn't comb your hair and don't really care how you show up, you got to look like you care. And you got to look like
you're personally attacking me from our Zoom this morning. I feel offended. I'm just kidding.
Threats are okay on Zoom, but the reality is you need to show up like a leader. And you also need to train people to be leaders. You need to grow yourself and they should be growing as well. Leaders learn, learners lead. So there's a lot of different leadership principles there. We can get into those on another webinar. Happy to do so. But ultimately, we have to do something about leadership growth. Did you know that more than 77% of organizations report that leadership is lacking? 77%, 3/4 of businesses out there. Leadership's lacking. And then 83% of businesses say it's important to grow leadership. So everybody's talking about it, but nobody's doing it.
Well, that goes back to what you said before about like millennials, for instance, they want leadership. And I see oftentimes there's always professional development built in because HR thinks it looks great. And what do you do with it? You send them to conferences. And what do they do at the conferences? Usually wander around aimlessly, or they're at the open bar, to be honest. And so that's not it, right? That can't be it. And you also can't afford to send everyone to leadership retreats, especially if they're not necessarily in a title that has president in it. So now what? And this kind of, before we miss this, Adam, I want to ask you, because I think it's really important what you did. Again, when I said like leadership for me it's always been like a cliche keyword term until COVID hit. And I was a Zor and a Z with the same brand. And I saw it firsthand of, when literally the world shut down, what did people do? They looked at the leaders, leadership, and they said, what do I do? Right. What's happening now with the economy and slowing sales is no different. They're
So
asking, what do I do? So what did you do, Adam? Because your story is nuts. Talk about needing a Xanax after that. But I think it's important that you talk about it because for someone who was in the role of CEO of Remax, I don't think most people would have expected that you would take the responsibility on that you did.
So ultimately what, obviously people are sending emails. Oh my gosh, I'm going to go out of business, looking for force majeure in their franchise agreement, whatever it might be. What can I do? Well, what they need is they need somebody confidently to follow. So I was on Zoom 12 to 14 hours a day, every day, working on this. I would get in front of franchisees. And remember, this happened around the world. Everybody was shut down. In fact, some franchisees would hold up their phone or their computer to the window, and you could see the military in the streets in these different countries, keeping people out of the street and in their apartments. So really what it came down to is create an environment where people were comfortable thinking about and working on moving forward. We did this constantly. I shot 41 videos, so one a week for 41 weeks, called Mind, Body, Business, talking about in your business, there's a keyword that you might use. Who knows what that keyword is that is in your particular franchise, but maybe it's style. Well, how does style impact your mind? So style, think about what I can do. I like to dress up and look good, things of that nature. How does it impact your body? I exercise to maintain my style. And how does it impact your business? We have a great environment for our customers to come visit and our employees to work in. So I antiquated a word to the business and then talked about that in Mind, Body, Business every week. Sent out those videos to everybody that showed up on my Zooms, which essentially was about 150,000 people over time. So it kept them excited about the future. Now, we didn't talk about when COVID was going to stop, because remember, everybody's like, oh, it's going to be 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks came and went. It's going to be 2 more weeks, 2 more weeks. What happens after that third or fourth try of a couple of weeks? Everybody starts to get depressed because they lose faith that something is going to change. We don't ever want to say it's going to be better on this date. This is actually something that was studied in the Hanoi Hilton during the Vietnam War. There was one of the commanders there, I think his name was Stockton. He figured out that if we gave a date that somebody was going to go home and that date came and went, a couple times later, that person would die. But if he didn't give a date and said, we're going to go home together, or we're going to go home at some point, let's stay strong, they would continue to fight because they constantly had that reinvigoration of the leadership pushing them to keep going. People don't go out in life and live off of just empty deadlines. They start to give up on themselves. They live off of faith and future. So our goal as a franchisor is to give the faith and future to our franchisees and help them continue to move forward. So it's important to constantly be there. I'll tell you a couple key points. As a leader, you need to be present. Presence creates trust. People want to trust a leader. Employees and customers want to trust a leader. That's why it's so important that you're always out there. And top of mind is first in line. So they just don't want to hear from you when you're, at the particular location, the franchise location or something like that. They want to hear from you more often. I participate with some businesses and I get videos from the leaders of those businesses on occasion in my email. And it's great because it reminds me of who they are. I get a text and it might have a video in it or something like that. Constantly be in front of your customers and constantly be in front of your employees. That top of mind puts you first in line, and that presence creates trust. Now, a big part of leadership is kind accountability. I say kind accountability because we can be the drill instructor and blow a whistle in their face and throw water on them and tell them they need to do something better. Or we can be the leader that they want to follow because they trust and believe in us. So this helps us get into a coaching approach. And I'm going to hand it back to Madeleine here to talk about coaching franchisees. But ultimately, we have two kinds of coaching. We have judgmental coaching where we're browbeating these people. That's not coaching. And we have that accountability coaching. What is the root word for accountability? It's account. Account. What is accounting? Noticing numbers. When we notice numbers, we're looking at the numbers, not the person. We're playing the ball, not the person. Madeleine played basketball. You get on the court and people start poking each other and getting mad at each other. they're not playing the ball, they're playing the person, and all they're doing is firing up emotions. We don't want to fire up emotions. We want to play the game based upon the systems that we have in place. That will help us win that game because we're not upsetting our franchisees. We're coaching them. I will pass it off to Madeleine after I ask you this. Are you coachable? Are you coachable? Are you willing to accept accountability? And are you willing to ignore judgment? Because we always default to thinking something is judgment when it might be just accountability masquerading as judgment. Find the accountability in that and get better by improving yourself. That's the only way our franchisees will get better, is if they understand what accountability is and they accept that and they become coachable, and we know how to coach them. Madeleine?
Yeah, so to sum this all up, I know we're coming up on time, is, you know, being a franchisee and a franchisor has showed me a lot of things. You know, one moment in particular of the franchisor, we announced something, we were so excited, we thought the franchisees were going to love it, and I came home to my husband, who was the primary franchisee, and he goes, "Can you believe this shit that they just put out?" Because they didn't see the other side of it. So even if you're acting with the best intentions, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be received that way. So I think a lot of what we're trying to tell you on this is, one, you have to know your numbers, you have to know your data, and you can't even just know your data in terms of, you know, our brand benchmarks. You need to know the industry and you need to know their data. And by their, I mean their franchisees. I can't tell you the amount of times that I will ask a brand president or a franchise business coach about a particular franchisee, and they have no idea about their numbers, their overhead. And, you know, I'm here on a call with them and they're beating me into the ground because we're not providing what we said we're going to provide. So know your data first, know your information. And if you don't have it, get it. And if you can't get it, start getting it and say, hey, in the next 3 months, we're going to start tracking this because this is going to be able to help us provide better metrics for you. And, you know, we'll talk about that more later as well on a different webinar. But then I would say, you know, we're talking about this leadership of empowering your franchisees to be active and engaged in their local community, in their franchise community, and with you. And I know it's much easier said than done. But what I want you to take back from this too is, obviously, we know the franchise business coaches are often referred to as like the therapists, right? They don't just get, here's my business. They also get, my mom passed away, or I got a new puppy and I wasn't able to go to the store. You know, you get the whole aspect of it, because as a franchisee, your life is completely transcended. Like, it's just transcended all your business or all your life. And so there is a level of empathy that we have to lead with as well. What I will say though, is no matter how much data you have, if a franchisee perceives that they are not doing well, even if the data says they're doing well, even if the data says everyone's doing the same, if they perceive that they are in a dangerous situation, that is their truth. And you have to coach to what they believe is true. And oftentimes franchisors will say, well, no, you're just not looking at it wrong, or don't talk to Rick, he just doesn't get it, he's off his rocker, like the numbers are the numbers are. Rick's truth is that his business is crumbling, and he's looking for someone to not just throw data in his face and get on the phone with him, but to lead him and talk him through why it's going to be okay, why the data is how it is. So you know, you really have to understand that, one, yes, you're going to have guardrails. Two, you're going to have your data. But three, the empathy piece is not just, I hear you and it is what it is, but it's, this is your truth, and let's figure out how we fix this together. And that's kind of where we're bringing in, you know, my data side and Adam's leadership side of, this is how you're going to grow your AUV these days. I can tell you to throw money every which way from Saturday in marketing. At the end of the day, you're, like you said, you're not going to fee your way to success. And franchisees aren't just going to go out there and be like, oh, great, here, I'm going to spend 40,000 this month instead of 10,000. It doesn't work like that. So we are coming up on time, and we're going to wrap on the next slide. So why are we doing this? Adam and I both get paid quite a bit of money to help consult with brands. I'm often call Adam, I'm like, oh, this brand's in shambles. How do I do this? How do I handle this? And we're also very passionate about franchising. And my big thing is, franchising puts food on the table for my kids. And I'm not going to get emotional. Sometimes I do. And I've seen it when it's gone poorly. I've seen us close locations and pull kids out of summer camp. I will never advise, educate, or push something on someone that might risk that for someone else, because I've seen it bad. I've seen a bad brand. I've seen great brands. And so my big thing is I love to educate, and Adam does too. So we've created what's going to be called FranCourse for things just like this nature. And Adam, I'm going to let you kind of wrap it up here, but the sentiment being we want to educate and we want to further franchising for the greater good. And also, like, I've got 3 kids under 10. Depending on how they behave, they may inherit the brand someday. So I should probably leave franchising better off than I came in. So that's a little bit about me. And Adam, go ahead and wrap it up.
There you go. And thank you, Madeleine, for sharing that. I mean, I think we can all agree that franchising continues to grow. It continues to get better, but it also continues to have challenges. We have 300 to 400 franchisors join franchising every single year. We also have hundreds leave franchising every year. We have franchisees that are doing great, and we have franchisees that struggle. Ultimately, Madeleine and I are kind of sick of chasing different locations to find a centralized point to help all these people. So between the networks that both of us have, we're going to continue to do these things. We are creating the inner circle of FranCourse. So it'll be a membership group where we can really get down and dirty in consulting a lot of these different franchisees. You guys will hear more about that. But be looking for more of these webinars. We'd love to share great value with the network, with the systems. If this was valuable to you, throw a yes in the comments so we have a pretty good idea. Also, you've got our email address, and we certainly would love to hear from you if you have any questions or any way we can help you in franchising. I like getting the good calls. I don't like getting the calls going, my franchisors or franchisees are leaving me, we're going to close down, I don't know what to do. But unfortunately, that's when we get those calls. I will say I also spent some time recently with another major franchisor, and it was for good reasons. They wanted to do some leadership instruction for their key franchisees, and it was fantastic. They got a lot out of it, and we ended up making a big difference for them. So love to see you guys here. Thanks for showing up, and shoot us any questions you have. You will all receive some notes from this as well as the recording, and we'd love to hear back from you with any questions, or if there's another topic that you want us to attack in one of these, let us know, shoot us an email, and we're happy to take a look at that.